So we'll kind of wrap up our unit here on voting, our study guide. So when we had left off on the other day, I was talking about why a person could potentially lose the right to vote. So we kind of listed some of these different reasons. Again, none of those things are good things to do, and all those things, felonies, tax evasion, any type of voting crime, those are all things that could cause a person to lose the right to vote forever. Number 14 here, I did make a little goof up the other day, so my bad. The government agency that is created to administer federal election laws, which are very complicated, is the Federal Election Commission. Not committee, but FEC, Federal Election Commission. I don't know why I said committee the other day. That's a my bad. But make sure you have this right, Federal Election Commission. All right, so one of the big things we hear a lot about now is campaign finance and campaign finance legislation. So again, it's very complicated, but our federal laws do allow for politicians to get donations, different types of donations from different groups of people. Okay, and we'll kind of just leave it at that because it's a very complicated matter. But a few years back, about 10 years ago, actually, there was a Supreme Court case known as Citizens United versus the FEC, where you have a group of people taking on the Federal Election Commission after it was ruled that this Citizens United group could not publish a certain video about a political candidate, actually Hillary Clinton, with so many days left before the election. So this goes to the Supreme Court. And this case dealt with a number of things. It dealt with campaign finance. It dealt with political media. But the Supreme Court eventually rules in a 5-4 decision. And what they're going to rule is in favor of the corporations or the large organizations, basically saying that corporations do have a First Amendment right to support whoever it is they want. So if, say, Google wants to take $1 billion and spend $1 billion on advertising for a political candidate, they can do that. That dollar amount might be off. I feel like there's still a dollar amount that has to be under. But the Supreme Court's going to rule in favor of these large organizations, saying that as a body, as a corporation, excuse me, is that they still have the right to make political contributions to the candidate that they want, okay, and that they have that First Amendment right that allows that. Now, again, campaign finance is very complicated. It's not my wheelhouse, but there are certain dollar amounts and such that have to be followed in different laws. It's very, very complicated matter. But I would know Citizens United versus FEC. It was a Supreme Court case that dealt with dollar amounts and what could be contributed by large organizations such as a corporation. And the Supreme Court's going to rule in favor of the corporation, saying that they have the power to make political contributions in the form of funds to whatever political candidate they would like. Okay. Another piece of important voting legislation is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This was a federal law that was aimed to protect voting rights for African Americans after the 15th Amendment was ratified. Again, many southern states, former Confederate states, had passed various laws trying to limit the African American vote, things such as literacy tests, things of that nature. There would also be a lot of voter intimidation outside of polling places where people might be threatened based on the way they were going to vote or how they voted. And so the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was aimed to protect some of those voting rights that had been extended to African Americans. Now, Voting Rights Act of 1965, some of its provisions have been extended a number of times. I think just recently in 2020, actually, parts of the Voting Rights Act were extended, that the federal government's continuing to enforce some of these things in attempt to prevent disenfranchisement of certain groups of people, namely minorities. Okay. 17 here is just a vocabulary term. So congressional elections held every 2 years. Again, reminder, House of Representatives is elected every 2 years, even in non-presidential years. We do also elect 1/3 of our U.S. Senate every other year. And we call these, when there is no presidential candidate on the line, we call that a midterm or an off-year election. Okay, midterm or off-year. Generally speaking, in these types of general elections, generally see a lower voter turnout. So like with the vote here that we just had, presidential vote that we just had earlier this week, one of the largest voter turnouts in history. Generally speaking, when the president is not being voted on, we see a lower voter turnout. Okay, so both elections are general elections happening in November, but when we are not electing a president, we call that a midterm or an off-year election. All right, talking about, excuse me. Ugh. Sorry about that. Talking about voter behavior, number 18 here is describing what we call voting fatigue. This one occurs when voters exhaust their patience and or knowledge as they work through their ballots. So I showed you guys those ballots in class a few weeks back, right? And some of those things on there, like, people ask, well, how do you know who to vote for? And sometimes you don't, because you might not have ever heard of those candidates. Or maybe for some offices, it's ironic that there's only one person who's running unopposed. And that's something you have to deal with too. constitutional measures, especially state constitutional measures, those can also be kind of complicated things to vote on, whether voting yes or no and what that all means. So what will happen is as a person fills out their ballot, they might kind of almost become somewhat fatigued or tired as they're filling it out because they don't actually know what they're voting for at that point or who they're voting for. Talking about non-voting, okay, talking about non-voting and the chief cause of non-voting. So if I, as a eligible voter, chose not to vote, what does that mean? And the chief cause of that is lack of interest. Basically, you have the attitude that you don't care what happens, and you don't have any political aspirations or opinions that you want to express in the form of voting. What's also I found interesting is generally non-voters tend to also be very politically opinionated. So I actually have one of those in my family. A sibling who chooses not to vote, actively chooses not to vote, even though he's eligible to. And he just says his vote doesn't matter, so he doesn't want to vote, and it's not going to change anything. And that kind of lack of interest or that lack of feeling that your vote matters is kind of the chief cause of non-voting. Again, I always encourage you, if you are eligible to vote, you should do so. Number 20 is describing the process of political socialization. That is the process through which you gain and learn your political attitudes and opinions. Again, a person is not born with these. Okay, these are learned. Okay, the other thing too about these is understand that they can change over the course of time. My political views and attitudes have changed a number of times from the time I was 18 to now when I'm 30. That's 12 years. Understanding that some of those factors can include who you hang around, your family and your friends. Family and friends are some of the biggest motivating factors in this. You're oftentimes going to have similar views to those who you associate yourself with, especially your family and your friends. Your profession, the media, obviously, with the dots, the media is very influential, sometimes misleading as well, but all very, again, play a factor in the political views that a person has that they learn. Again, we call that process political socialization. Where a person lives, the geography. North Dakota, very conservative state. A lot of people who live in North Dakota are conservative. That's okay, but that geography kind of plays a factor in that. The same token, people who live in major metropolitan areas, there's generally a larger liberal or Democrat population there, and that's something else that can play a factor. Obviously, too, we also talk about religion and how that can also play an influence in voting and such. Okay, getting into our last two voting behaviors, talk about straight ticket voting. A straight ticket voter is somebody who will only vote for members of one political party, even if they do not know that person or that candidate's stance on an issue. Again, party identification is one of our big factors in American politics. I have family members too that have only voted for one member of a certain party, even though they might not know anything about a candidate. They will only vote for a member of a certain party because of that party, and not become what I call an issue-based voter, but becoming a partisan-based voter, which again, both, in my opinion, as somebody who is an issue-based voter, somebody who has voted for members of both parties, I have issues that are important to me. Some people believe having a certain party in office, having more partisan control is more important. So whereas somebody who votes for only one member of a certain political party, they call that straight ticket. Somebody who might vote for members of more than one party, we call that split ticket. Okay. If you also wanted to add issue-based voting, somebody who votes for candidates based on their stance on certain issues, whether it's abortion, gun control, same-sex marriage, immigration, defense, whatever it might be, government spending. There are people that will vote, again, based on an issue as well. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, this would complete our study guide and kind of just scroll through it again here, just nice and slow so that you can get it filled out. Again, please get this submitted to Edmodo. Study guides should be all complete here. Just getting back to the top of the front page. Make sure you know these different amendments and what they say. Those are things that could be fair game for a test that we will take next week. Okay, seniors, have a great day. Again, email me with questions.